So welcome everyone in person and online. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to virtually and physically to the Games Institute. The Games Institute is an interdisciplinary research center at the University of Waterloo. We support research that hovers around broadly construed games and interactive immersive technologies. So the Games Institute does not exist without its members, and so our role is to support the researchers, faculty and students, and along with our partners from outside of the university to do what they do best in a very broad realm of interactive immersive technologies, games, game-like things, and media. This is a very broad introduction to the Games Institute. If you wish to take a look a little bit closer, I will refer you to our website. But today we are here to welcome one of our researchers, John Muñoz here, who had very kindly and actively organized this very event by securing our other speaker. Ify, if I could ask you to please turn on your camera for us now. Thank you very much. This is our other speaker. I will introduce the speakers in just one moment, but along with the introduction to the Games Institute, which is what I had just done, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Agata Antkiewicz, and I am the Associate Director for Strategic Planning and Administration, which is a very long way of saying that I support everything and manage everything that happens at the Games Institute from an administrative standpoint. Obviously, faculty and research and students are doing their research, and the staff here is to support those activities. Now, as part of my own introduction, I will tell you, and also on behalf of the University and the Games Institute, I will tell you that here in Canada, over the last few years, we have been struggling with the history of colonization in this country and on the continent. And so we always start our events and some of our even smaller gatherings with a territorial acknowledgement. What that means is that I will tell you a little bit about the land that we stand on today. And the acknowledgement has to do to the land that is 10 kilometers or 6 miles on either side of the Grand River that runs through the region here. And this land has been the traditional territory of the original custodians and occupants and of this land, and those are the nations of Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the neutral peoples. The history of colonization that the Western European settlers have brought here with them, and that has been presented as history of this land over the last 200 or 300 years, excludes the First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit people. And so we are now trying to bring those voices back from the marginalized margins and acknowledge the deep traditional knowledge and cultures and customs and languages that have been almost erased from history. Again, the nations are the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and neutral peoples. Now, for those of you who are online, and perhaps even in other places, because we do have an international audience, I've noticed today, I will give you a moment, and even if you're not international, but outside of the Waterloo region, think whether or not the land you live and benefit from as you go about your daily life has a history of marginalization or exclusion or erasure of other nations or of other peoples, languages, cultures, and traditional knowledge. Because it's important that we take that history into account. Now, territorial acknowledgements only work if the one that gives them actually relates their own life to the land. And I will tell you that I am a settler in Canada and in the Waterloo region specifically. I came here 20 years ago. I have since been able to benefit from the land here by raising my own family here. And so as I go on day to day on that journey of life and work on the university campus and in town where I live, I try to, again, remember the marginalized and erased voices and raise them up. This is what we do at the Games Institute. And with that, and I understand that this may seem a little long, but it's very important. So if you are on a different territory of a traditional knowledge, a traditional presence, I will give you a moment to give your thoughts to that history. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce our speakers today, and I will show you Iffy a little bit more closely. Iffy, I'm going to spotlight you now for everyone. So don't be surprised if you suddenly go big on your own screen. There we go. And Iffy, I tried to practice your name earlier before, so but if I butcher it, I ask for forgiveness. So Iffy Mavridou, I believe, is a doctor, Iffy Mavridou, I should say, as a research consulting manager and lead effect engineer at XR, so extended reality at MTech Labs. And Dr. Mavridou specializes in wearable affective computing in VR and XR, machine learning, signal processing, and empirical experimental design. Her doctorate thesis was based on detecting arousal and valence, emotional states, with novel integrated physiological wearable sensors in virtual reality settings, and also combining VR and affective computing research. And since 2020, Iffy has been leading the affect research team at MTech Labs, while consulting on numerous commercial and academic XR-related projects. She is acting as product owner at MTech VR, MTech Pro, and also supervision systems. And for a long time now, since 2015, my notes say here, she has been an invited speaker in numerous events and has authored multiple high-impact articles on human-computer interaction, affecting computing, and wearable sensing. Welcome, Iffy, to the Games Institute, and I look very much forward to listening to everything you have to say. And the organizer of this event and our own Games Institute member here, John Muñoz, Dr. John Muñoz, I should say, again. I forget about people's titles, forgive me. John is a game designer and interface technologist specializing in the use of physiological signals to optimize the user experience in interactive systems. John is currently the Chief Science Officer at JNF Alliance Group and an adjunct professor here at the University of Waterloo. And he carries out research in the fields of physiological computing, assistive technology, human-robot interaction, and virtual reality, which is very much related to what Iffy is doing. So no wonder the two of you are actually here together.
Close friends.
Very close friends, awesome. John has created multiple software tools and design frameworks that allow the integration of games and physiological signals on applications such as social robots, games for health, and virtual simulations for training. John has been a speaker at many international conferences on human-computer interaction and serious games, and has co-organized panels, workshops with experts in the fields of game design, human-computer interaction, and physiological computing, including some cooperation with NASA. Is that not true? Yeah, and a number of presentations at the GDC conferences as well. So welcome again, John. I mean, you're here every week, so welcome on an extra day. And Iffy, and with that, John, I will let you take over, and I will come back for the Q&A. In the meantime, for the online audience, one of my friendly event ghosts in the back end here will post the housekeeping rules for the event. And all of them are saying, please be kind and considerate in online communication. The chat is open for those of you online. We will be monitoring it for questions to bring them back to Iffy and John at the end of their presentations. And if you please wouldn't mind keeping your cameras and your microphones off until you are recognized to speak in the Q&A session, just so that we can avoid any unnecessary feedback and focus on our speakers. With that, again, Q&A at the end, and I invite you to pop questions into the chat for the online audience, and for people, the folks here in person, you're going to just wave your hand at us so that we can include you in the conversation as well. On that note, John, over to you. Oh, Iffy is starting. Okay, my apologies, Iffy. Go ahead, please. I believe you have a presentation to share with us.
I do, and thank you very much for the introduction. I'll just take a second to put the presentation up again. Can you please confirm you can see my screen my full?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much.
Great. So thank you again for the introduction. I can start with the presentation now. So as said before, I work as an affect scientist, which means I'm trying to find ways to understand the emotion of the user. I've been using physiological sensors and wearables to allow that to be a reality until now. There is a lot of technology available to us currently. A lot of it we've been developing ourselves as part of the high-tech company I'm based in. It's called MTech Labs. We've been developing hardware and software solutions that can allow us to not only detect physiological signals, but also interpret them and provide actionable insights to the users. The key takeaways of this presentation today is to inform you about some of the wearable biometrics we have been using in the past to measure how the users respond to content and how they feel. I want to emphasize a little bit on the importance of knowing the context, why that response was made and why it was triggered in the first place. And then I'm going to show you some examples of case studies and affect analysis work that we've done with some videos so that you can see what the user was doing, etc. So some of them might not be completely clear to you, but you can ask more of the questions afterwards in the QA if you want. And I'm going to also give you a quick glimpse of our latest novelty with wearables and what we've done and how it works. So the main question we have is, did it work? How did the user feel when they were in the environment? And this is a way of measuring emotion, which drives behavior. And by being able to measure that, we can understand the engagement of the user or the success of our content. So it's very, very important to understand the level or the extent of impact that our content has on the user. And this answers our main question: how do they feel? So through many years of research, today we're able to witness the development of wearable biometric solutions with multimodal settings, and we're able to track information about the player state, performance metrics, and also gather actionable feedback or insights for the user and the designer of the environment as well. We can even use that information for other applications, such as for medical assessment. And this is all powered by solutions that have been lately advanced and embedded with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So it's a multidisciplinary solution, if I may say, but it sits on the shoulders of accurate and wearable sensors. So the sensors that we can use in virtual reality compared to the real world, they're not much different from each other. They are the same methods, and I believe John is going to talk more about this afterwards. But in the case of virtual reality, what we really need to put a lot of attention to is that we develop things, we create solutions that are easy to use, are unobtrusive, and they allow the naturalistic interaction of the user with the content. We don't want to create any breaks. We don't want to distract them from what they're doing. We want to record on the backseat and understand how the user feels. So the model that we have been using as part of my PhD and later on with MTech Labs in order to organize all the emotional states and labels is this dimensional model that you see on your screen. This is a dimensional model of affect. And it contains two main dimensions: valence, which goes from very negative to very positive along a continuum, and arousal, which is, as we say, an intensity level. Our autonomic nervous response is expressing this sort of intensity, and we can track it with different wearables that have been commonly used in the past. But the dimension that we have not been able to track massively, we have not focused a lot on, is valence. And valence is so important when we're dealing especially with games or interactive application, immersive applications. It's important to know why that increase in our arousal was made. Was it a positive response? Was it a negative response? Is there a fault with the interactivity? Is there a fault with the content? What is it? What happened? You know, this is the main question we want to answer. In virtual reality, especially with headsets, it's not so easy to see behind the face. And with decades of research behind, we know that the most informative muscles are surrounding our eyes, which are covered actually by the headset. These are also the muscles that are the most expressive around our eyes. And we have that since we are babies, really. We're able to express our emotions via facial expressions. We don't need any training. This is how we learn to interact and communicate with one another. And this is how we do it with everyday life, right? So we wanted to combine a way of getting arousal, but also getting valence information all in one in an easy way, an integrated way. No more a lot of cables, no more difficult setups, etc. So we designed solutions that had a different array of sensors. In this case, we have EMG, PPG, movement sensors, and eye tracking all in one in virtual reality headsets. And now we've been working also in a glasses format, which is what I'm going to show you later on. This included 7 electromyographic sensors around the eyes. We've got on the cheeks, which is the zygomaticus major, on the eyes, orbicularis, frontalis muscle for raising your eyebrow, and frowning, which is very important for negative responses. We also have information about the movement of the user and the posture and the activity. And we also get information about their level of arousal via heart rate variability, etc. What is really interesting about virtual reality and games and other interactive applications is that you don't have a linear way of going from one event into the next, right? The player is free to choose where they want to look at, what they want to interact with, and whether they want to go from point A to point C and back and whatever. So we need a way of tracking what exactly it is that make the users feel that way, what exactly they interact with. And because it doesn't follow a linear fashion, we have to create unique new ways of dealing with that, right? So as part of my PhD later on with the work with MTech, we developed this solution that worked within 3-dimensional custom environments. So in effect, let's say you've got 5 objects that you want to track. You've got, in this example, you've got a robot on a desk, you've got a monitor, something happens on the monitor, and there's a couple of other things happening around you. We can't control where the user look at and what they interact with, but we can track it with eye tracking. And that was the basis of this approach. Gaze tracking, eye tracking, and movement was used to track where the user was focusing at and extend that to different layers of the 3D background. And so with this approach, we were able to track in real time where the user was looking at, create markers or event information or labels. They're all the same thing here. And those labels would be added alongside the data recorded from those sensors in order to be analyzed. And that can also be applied not only to specific events to specific objects, but to key events in the experience that you want to analyze or you want to see how it performed. So the overall solution architecture, as you can see here, it starts from the user wearing the virtual reality headset or mixed reality headset or anything else, together with the wearable sensors. Then the system streams data in real time in a high resolution, together with contextual information from the scene. And together they go into a system that interprets the reactions of the users, the movement and the facial expressions, and provides, through a machine learning model, provide some output, some insights in response to valence and arousal indications. It can also be further calibrated to the user. Additional metrics can be added. So all this is part of an SDK or an API that developers or designers can use. And some of the examples and how we started really, because in order to build a machine learning model that could work with multiple users, this is a very difficult task. Obviously it doesn't apply to all the different target groups you might have. But the basis upon which we developed our model was a study that we conducted at the Science Museum, which is one of the studies I'm very proud of, with 750 volunteers that went through an experience of 4 different environments, a neutral, a positive, a negative, and a baseline. And you can see an example here if it plays. So the user is going through a first version of the environment. Here is a slightly negative environment, and we can see in real time their responses, their facial expressions, their smiles, and that intensity, as well as the attention to the separate events that were activated at different times. And we also extended that later on with more algorithms, and we could extract also valence and arousal, heart rate variability, breathing rate, and different other metrics. By combining this mapping solution together with the affective or expressive insights that we got from the technology, allowed us to generate a simplified view of all the different events that we were interested in studying. And that is the one I've put on the right-hand side of this slide, this 2D map. Each individual point here is every different event that was activated within these 3 scenes on the left. And the more negative the response was, the more on the left, the more positive on the right. It follows the same approach as the dimensional model. And so highly negative events were recognized, highly positive events were also recognized and valued. Another example we ran with our collaborators from Pollen Acoustics is Peril, the story, The Sound of Story, a very emotional 360 video, and which also got, I think, a Nobel Prize for, sorry, what did I say? A nomination for Oscar, which in itself says a lot about the intensity of this immersive story. Anecdotally, we know that spatial audio is able to generate stronger emotional responses, but we had no evidence until now. We had no evidence to show that this is actually happening. So with Pollen, we devised a study and we used the MTech Pro system on 2 separate groups. That was done actually during COVID, during the pandemic. So it was a difficult study to organize, but it was done. One group had spatial audio and the other one had mono audio. And then we recorded the facial responsiveness, we recorded heart rate and movement. In this one, we can see valence predictions from the 2 groups. And what really struck us is that the spatial audio group responded more emotionally in accordance to the event. So if an event was meant to induce positive responses, we had a higher valence, more positive responses from the spatial group compared to the mono. If it was a more negative event, we had stronger, again, emotional responses from the spatial audio group. Heart rate was also significantly increased, especially at key moments of the experience where it was meant to induce stronger effects. So something really, really sad happened or something very happy happened. There were a lot of memories in between the daughter and her family, etc. And we also saw that movement correlated significantly with the source of the audio. So spatial audio group were able to look around and find the source of the audio and where the action was happening, really. Whereas the mono audio users did not always look at the right point and might have not seen important information. Another example I've added here is from an immersive public speaking training scenario. where we've got people with phobias of public speaking, and the goal of this training was to allow them to see and get feedback from their reactions, but also record how they interacted with the audience in a safe manner. So without really putting them through the whole traumatic experience again, just allowing them to interact with a virtual audience and slowly boost their confidence. Not only we were able to provide that real-time information to the researchers who were looking at the different effects of the simulation, but also to provide a more high-level view for the user themselves. So here we have, for example, the user went through the experience a few times, and we can see that stress levels were reduced. They looked more on the audience, which was a goal. They smiled and opened their eyes a lot more while interacting with the audience, and that was a big success for them. Another project we ran was with a simulated 3D replica of a very big train station before it was built. The goal of this project was to for users to go through different scenarios, move from one place into the other, from one platform, and catch another train, and everything was simulated. And here I've got the 3D representation of a very small journey using Cognitive 3D. And what we did was we recorded data again with the MTech Pro, valence and arousal and stress, and we looked at individual events and objects, about 900 different objects and events. And we found out that actually on the bottom left, you can see a 2D representation of the average values across all of the individuals. And what does that tell us? That the majority of the events were mainly neutral or positive, but a few of those were highly negative. And those were fairly clear to us early on, so we were able to focus on those and explore them even further and find out that they were all wrong signages or problems that needed to be fixed, or confusion points that could be amended in the actual station in the future. As well as that, with our hardware and with our software, we were able to take part into studies and provide information about the stress of the user, and those were applied in healthcare application predominantly. Here we've got basic life support training on the left-hand side, and we also did a PTSD therapy with our collaborators, Nice Day in the Netherlands, in order to detect stress in a remote virtual reality session with a therapist, where the user was able to go through an EMDR study and then visualize their optimal or suboptimal level of arousal and stress. And that's very useful currently because a lot of applications are focused on meditation, meditation, and stress relief. And as we move from the highly controlled studies to the real world and augmented reality and mixed reality, we now have a lot more wearables available to us. We have new technologies that are coming up in the next year as well, and most of them are taking different form factors. A very common one which we have been working with is the eyewear approach, where sensors are embedded within the frame. So what we did was we developed sensors that are equivalent to EMG for tracking facial expressions, but in this case they're optical, so they can be used easily without having skin contact. Again, the same paradigm was used, so we were tracking the same amount of sensors, we were interpreting them into valence and arousal, and we tried to have as a more naturalistic, unobtrusive setup as possible. Here's one of the first versions that we did, and this is an avatar that was recreated, not based on my face, but it's moved by the power of those sensors and movement as well. No camera input has been used for that, it's just glasses. I wanted to show you a little bit on how it works in terms of the sensor output, because we've met with a lot of people who wanted to just use the insights or use them for real-time feedback. We know that as analysts, is it working? Yeah. As analysts, this real-time signal view may not be very, very clear to everyone. That's why we developed other solutions that give you different feedback, more visual, more higher level. And for example, here the user is doing different expressions with different intensities, and we're able to see that directly. We're able to utilize it and export it in terms of analyzed output, but also as part of an API so that developers can use it as extra input in their applications. See, a very, very small smile was made here. And one of the recent developments that my team has been doing in the last 5 days, that's very, very new, so I'm bringing it over to you, is an automatic gesture detection without calibration here. We're able to detect winking, smiling, frown, and surprises. Also able to detect anomalies as well in case you have a very specific protocol that needs to be done at home, but you don't want to include information from other sources of data, for example, by chewing a gum or by talking. These can be excluded because we can detect them with these. And posture as well, because some of the user researchers have been saying that posture is very, very important. It also signifies the level of engagement with the content, frustration, as well as boredom. So in combination with other metrics such as facial reactivity, voice, behavior, and interactivity, we can gain very useful insights about how the person feels. So in terms of best practices, if you want to utilize physiological measures in your study, do so, but try to reduce complexity and distractions, especially for extended reality and virtual reality. This is very, very important. There were a lot of studies in the past where there were cables coming from all places, and the user were asked about how they felt for, using questionnaires in the middle of the experience, and that is causing a lot of breaks in presence, as we call it, or breaks in immersion and flow. So we don't want to be doing that, especially for virtual reality and for continuous immersive experience. We want to, as I said before, measure how the user feels while being on the backseat, allow them to experience it fully, and then get some totalized output afterwards if you want. You can track the moment by moment changes and responses using biometrics. In this case, that's the only way that you can track very, very small points in the experience and compare them in between different segments. For our solution, we have been using heart rate responses for arousal and facial expressivity for valence. There are many different methods that you can track arousal and valence, or track intensity. I think John will mention this afterwards. But in the case of virtual reality, we wanted to deal with smaller time windows, so quicker responses from the system. So heart rate and facial expressivity were preferred. Use eye tracking, if combined with biometrics, it can directly give you a link to what happened, what was the context of the response, both subjective context, so user traits, but also environmental traits, environmental context. What exactly happened? What were they looking at? In which scenario was it? Was it meant to be positive? Was it meant to be negative, etc.? Also bear in mind that every user is different and they respond in different manners. There's a lot of literature on the back end of this, but in a high level, we know that personality, anxiety levels, and disorders or conditions as well can affect our data. We can have completely different responses. It's also very important to track this as you go in a study. So biometrics are available for extended reality now. It's a dream come true, if I may say. It's been many years now that we have been using physiological data, many decades. However, now they're purely adapted for the new XR headsets, and together with the graphics and other technological capabilities, we're able to run and stream very high resolution data. And there are now systems that communicate with one another. There is AI, machine learning models that can fast track those insights and provide you with just a high level output for your application. There is API, there SDK, the synchronization software that give you new abilities as a developer and researcher. So a lot of the research we've been doing in the past has been about validating content, understanding how it makes people feel. It's the same thing that you do for market research or user research, right? Is the validation of the ability of the content to induce certain intensities, but also certain engagement levels. You can also use it for personalizing and adapting experiences, which for me is still something that I'd love to see more and more happening. With heart rate and arousal, you can see whether the user is feeling more stressed, for example, and change the difficulty of the game, or you can induce positivity and use that intensity back into the game to change parameters and make it more personalizable. I would say for any studies you run, as I say to my team as well, it's very important that we have very clear objectives from day one and we don't overcomplicate things, because it can easily happen when you want to study everything all at once. So establish realistic expectations early on. Choose a sensor setup for your settings, specifically for your game or your content. Avoid any cumbersome or destructive setups for the user. Explore friendly software, software that were able to give you the insights you need for the type of application you need instantly. Don't go through and reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. There must be methods and tools out there that can help you do what you need. You still need to have some training, but that nowadays is much easier. But you can also collaborate with an analyst or a consultant that can help you shape the protocol or the paradigm that you're going to take and help you bring that solution to fruition. Always back up your analysis, one more thing, and always make sure that you synchronize very well what's happening with the content and with the data. And yes, that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evie. Thank you for the introduction. I think we're going to leave all the questions towards the end after we both complete all the different presentations. It was great, and I think the fact that we're creating this panel is certainly because we both have been doing this transitioning between academia and the industry, and so the challenges that we found is how do you use the knowledge that we built in our PhD or through our PhDs to actually build products and things that people can use. Because a lot of times we build things in academia, but we don't necessarily think on potential end users. And that's something, and Evie and myself, I think we both share and are very passionate about it. So if you have any potential questions for Evie, just skip it towards the end. We will have this more flexible discussion. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go with my presentation. And you will see that there's many commonalities, the things that we will be presenting here. And those basically because we were both putting together some of these slides in the past for a panel, which were invited at the Games Developer Conference when Evie and myself were able to share some of this insights. Are you guys seeing my screen now? Yes? I think I'm spotlight as well.
Yes, sure.
Nice. So I'm going to be here talking about physiological input and outputs, and my main focus here is mostly in showing you some of the things that Efi was mentioning. So there's already tools, hardware and software tools that exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to working with this kind of physiological sensors. I work as an adjunct professor here at the university, but I'm also a UX research scientist in a company in a firm in the US that does virtual reality for training. And some of the takeaways that I'm planning to bring to this talk is the potential of using these physiological signals to reveal some of the unconscious player states, which is something some other methodologies cannot do that naturally. The second aspect is bringing you a toolbox of hardware and software tools. Those are the ones that I've seen that are interesting, nice. Some of them are more expensive than others. Some of them are open source that you can use. But overall, nowadays, you can have a wide range of tools that you could use that you probably didn't have a decade ago for this specific technology that makes this research, I will say, less intimidating probably than it was in the past. And in particular, I'm going to be showing you at the end some of the novel frameworks that we have been creating specifically to interface this physiological signals with game engines, which is something that in most of the cases when we're creating this kind of applications is something challenging to do, just because game engines and biomedical devices, they don't speak the same language. They always there's always many challenges associated to when it comes to creating those interfaces. So overall, especially when we were working in game user research, we want to collect information from players after the experience. But just as if it was mentioning, there's multiple ways in which you can do this. And the first one is, of course, you can ask questionnaires at the end. This is a quick and easy way of collecting information, but sometimes you can get dishonest information from participants. Sometimes when you're working with certain participants, they will give you the opinion that you want to hear as an experimenter and not necessarily the one that was real. You got interviews, which are very good to do follow-ups and give you an in-depth knowledge in which, in regards to the things that were happening during the experience, and the why is something that you can easily follow up. But normally the interviews are very time demanding, and you need a good moderator to conduct a good interview in order to get the insights that you need. When working with the games and virtual reality system, you can also collect behavioral data. That means specific clicks or specific interactions that they have inside the virtual environments. That's very unobtrusive, and those are very good in answering the what and when. The problem with this is not necessarily good in terms of answering the why. And collecting the data insights from that, massive amount of data is not always easy. And you can see that a lot of this game data is actually available, and there's platforms constantly looking at that data from those massive multiplayer games that already exist. So this talk, and part of what also Efi has been building here, is the use of physiological metrics, not as a way of not as an alternative way of collecting all this information, but more as a complementary way of the conventional methods that already exist. Physiological data can be good for to provide quantifiable information, continuous recording, but the problem sometimes it can be a bit obtrusive, and as we mentioned before, the interpretation could be challenging just because of the data that the nature of the data that we are dealing with. There's no perfect methodology, and the best way most of the times to collect information from this experience is by combining all of these methods. This is a non-extensive list of physiological and biometric data. By the way, the word biometric is mostly used in the game user research field, but in biomed and in many other fields, we like using physiological signals. Those two things are somehow in this specific field referred as the same. When I say a non-extensive list, it's literally because this is not, it's just, those are only the techniques that we have seen here and there that people have been using in the last 2 or 3 decades when collecting multiple physiological signals. So you have things like photoplethysmography. A lot of the smartwatches are now used to record this signal, which is an optic signal that records our oxygen saturation in our blood. Got magnetoencephalography, electroencephalography, and this is, just a way of showing you that when it comes to working with the signals, one of the first steps that you need to do is to try to have a selection of the techniques that you're trying to use for that is somehow connected to the research question that you have. Because most of the times, not because you have all the equipment ready, those kits that are coming with electromyography, electroencephalography, electrocardiography, not because you have the kit, that means you need to put electrodes on each user just to collect that data and see what is going to happen after it. So a good study using this type of sensors starts by selecting a subset of techniques that will help you to answer the research question that you're trying to answer. But when it comes to what can really be detecting by using these sensors, it really varies from things like stress, that you can use things like heart rate variability, for instance, is being shown as a very powerful indicator of psychological stress. Eye tracking has been also lately being extensively used, especially in the field of extended realities for things like cognitive load. There's multiple companies doing or using this approach. Arousal levels, when you capture the activity of sweat glands, electrodermal activity, you can get into physiological arousal. And electroencephalography, for instance, is pretty good in collecting elements related to attention and relaxation levels. Nevertheless, when it comes to transforming the raw data, so the data that the sensor is giving you, just by connecting it towards something that you can use as what we call a human state of psychophysiological state in psychophysiology, is not a simple task. So here you have an example. EEG 16 channels may look like this. But then, in order to explore things like human states, you probably need to start using features. You probably need to extract those features. You need to first process the signal and then extract features. Some examples of features in EEG are what is called oscillatory rhythms. So you get alpha, beta, delta, and theta. You can extract those, but then how do you actually extract a human state? You can use approaches like machine learning models, Ify was showing just some minutes ago, or in the past, there's been some research in indexes that, in which you may combine certain features related to, in this case, the frequency bands, and define, or in this case, characterize things like engagements. But that entire process normally requires things like pre-processing, filters, feature extraction, and feature selection process that sometimes can be computationally expensive depending on how much data you have. This is, mostly how do you transform the data, but that how do you interpret the data is another challenge that we have in this field. And we have, specifically in psychophysiology, something that is called psychophysiological relationships. There is unfortunately not in real life something like one physiological signal pointed out to one psychological state in a one-to-one fashion. That's normally doesn't happen. So what you have is multiple relationships. You have when you get your heart rate is up, that is probably related to, I don't know, increases in the temperature, increases of stress. Maybe you got a lot of caffeine during the morning. Maybe you are just thinking or overthinking of a problem you may have. So that single increase of heart rate can be related to many of those factors that we just mentioned over here. That's what we call here the one-to-many. But normally, we also have one specific psychological state. Let's say frustration can be or can produce or elicit many physiological responses. Let's say, because if you are frustrated, you start having certain facial expressions. You start sweating, or your heart rate may vary in a different way once compared when you are relaxed. So, and this is critical when it comes to trying to interpret your physiological data, and especially trying to infer certain states. Some of the important elements that you have over here is how do you actually select the appropriate variables to study. As I mentioned before, not because you have the sensor, that means you need to wear all your users with all the sensors possible. How detailed you should be measuring certain selected variables. How do you consider the situation or the context that is happening in order to infer certain states? How effective certain physiological signal is to describe certain psychological factors. So for that, we need powerful tools. And that's part of what I'm going to be showing you here is that there's list of software and hardware tools that nowadays we can use to help us to navigate some of these challenges when it comes to doing research. So let's start by the hardware tools. I have divided this into three. The first is research focus. So we have seen many EEG caps, like the ones created at GTech, a lot of wearable sensors like the Shimmer device, or nowadays you have more do-it-yourself kits like the Motivate. Those sensors right there may range from $400 to $10,000. Just as if it was showing you MTech, for instance, is creating this facial electromyography technology to record facial expressions, but there's some other sensors and people working in integrating physiological, neurophysiological sensors as well into those virtual reality headsets or augmented reality headsets like Cognition or Galea. You probably have seen these or have worked with those, or you probably have one of those already. EEG headbands or ECG chest strap sensors, or even smartwatches that allow us the collection of those signals. So nowadays, we can say that there is a diaspora of sensors and technologies that you could potentially use to study specific physiological reactions in people. It always really comes down to what's your budget, and what is the type of context where you want to analyze users or players. With this, the ones for fitness and well-being are pretty good when people are just walking naturally or doing activities naturally, whereas these ones in the research focus are probably more focused when you have control environments versus when you have people interacting with virtual or augmented reality signals. You probably will prefer this kind of embedding sensors. Software tools. I did a review of toolboxes that already exist, are already there. Independently of what is the language, the programming language that you know or you were familiar with, you can always find tools. There are some of them that are you need to license. Some of them are open source. You got NeuroKit is a Python library, for instance, that you can use. You have Physiolab, which is a MATLAB library. You have C++ libraries that already exist, and these libraries just help you to go through the painful process of pre-processing, extracting features, and interpreting the physiological signals. Some of the issues that I found with these software tools, especially when doing some interview with 13 experts in the field, was the software compatibility. So that means there's certain hardware that are just compatible with some software. So when you want to combine data from, I don't know, the chest strap from this specific manufacturer versus combining that with the facial electromyography with another one, then you have just a lot of problems. There's limited options sometimes for processing and interpretation. So that means there's plenty of libraries for pre-processing and noise reduction and extracting some of the features, but not necessarily for interpreting those features. And then one of the big headaches for us as technologists in this area is how do you synchronize data? If you are not able to synchronize your physiological data with the data of your application, then you are not able to do causality analysis. So causality is probably one of the most interesting insights that you can get out of these physiological signals, because you can associate the stimuli with the specific responses. But if you cannot do that, at the end you will end up just saying, people were stressed throughout the experience. But you want to know exactly what are those elements that cause the stress or the frustration, and that's exactly what you don't necessarily find in these tools, unfortunately. So what we have been doing, or I've been doing in particular with some collaborators from different places, is trying to build some tools that are in particularly they have communication, they have good communication with game engines. That means we can synchronize the data coming from the virtual reality or from any game developed under this specific platforms, like for instance Unity, and at the same time you can in a more natural way do this data collection without the need of having multiple applications running at the same time. So this is one that we created some years ago. It's called the Excitometer, and it basically works with heart rate and heart rate variability to compute what is called sympathetic activation. Or we can put it in the world virtual reality has excitement. That means there's a specific reaction. You don't necessarily know if that is positive or negative. And we try to make some analysis of that specific valence information, but heart rate variability is very good to give you mostly arousal levels of that. So we not only integrated this tool inside Unity, but we also try to use commercially available sensors like the chest strap, polar chest strap sensor, to be able to collect heart rate and heart variability and do a combination of those metrics to collect excitement or sympathetic activation. So you can use this with any project created in Unity. Just bring it as a plugin, and then you have access to panels for data collection, biofeedback in real time if you're planning to use applications and biofeedback. And then at the end, you can also get a panel for visualizing the signals that you collected. And this visualization comes not only with the physiological data in terms of heart rate and heart variability, but also head movements, controller movements, and also screenshots or elements, visual elements of what was happening in the scene while people were interacting with the virtual environment. So this is a plugin, is already there in GitHub. If you plan to start working with virtual reality and working with this kind of physiological signals, this is one of the tools that we have created to do that. And similar to, again, what was Ify was mentioning, a lot of those tools, we are so used to work with them just because we're coming from a research background. But when it comes to allow others different than researchers to use this specific technology, you need to transform that research into products. And I know if he's a product owner of some of the platforms that they are creating MTech. And what I'm trying to do, especially with this firm, JNNL Alliance in Virginia, in the US, is creating an SDK, a software tool that would allow us to integrate multiple sensors and will make our research with physiological signals certainly easier. So how it works, it has a mobile app that connects multiple physiological sensors, such as the polar chest strap or the Motivate. You use a mobile phone for that. Then we created a Unity package that can be imported into any project developed in Unity. And at the end, because we also want to facilitate the interpretation of this data, we use a framework called Streamlit, which is Python, to basically facilitate the interpretation of that data in real time. And what we provide is mostly data visualization techniques. And we are allowing multiple sensors. In this case, you can see some of the work that we have done in virtual reality training for law enforcement in the US, in which you can see how was the response of heart rate and heart variability responses, the brain signals, as well as the affective responses coming from the facial electromyography that we use, in this case, the MTEC. And everything is compact again into a usable system that other researchers could use. What we are planning to do with this is to be able to create physiologically adaptive games, which is somehow the next step. So you normally you use the physiological signals, collect them passively, and in a post-hoc analysis, you try to unveil what was happening. You can also add part of this physiological feedback or biofeedback into the experience and see how people can train their self-regulation skills. But then I will say the most sophisticated way maybe of using this in real time is to allow the system to create adaptations in real time based on the interpreted human states that you have. People more stressed, then you change the experience based on that. That is called affective loop. You can also find that as a biofeedback loop, or there's some literature calling this biocybernetic loop. But the concept is the same. Inside or within the game, the conventional game loop or interactive loop that you have, you add the interpretation of the physiological signals on top. And then you can use these, in this case, for instance, within the games, as a control input to change the difficulty, something that is called dynamic difficulty adaptation in games, or you can use it to change environmental variables and allow people to be more aware of their physiological responses and therefore training their self-regulation. And this is some of the things that I'm currently doing with these techniques. We are applying to the grant in the NASA TRISH. TRISH is the a biomedical healthcare branch of NASA, which studies a lot of the long-term effects of space traveling. We're planning to integrate some of this virtual reality application, especially nature scenery with audiovisual stimulation and neurofeedback to see if this is able to help travelers, especially for relaxing and staying more calm while they are exposed to a lot of those stressors of the traveling. I'm also working with this Polish company, which does cyberpunk games, and they're very interested in establishing an R&D department, specialized in biofeedback and how to bring these interfaces to the next level and be able to commercialize the games that are intelligent in a way that they can interpret some of those body signals that we can collect and create this new paradigm of games, which is a very ambitious project, but it's an interesting game to do. So beyond some of those games, I also have done some research here in Waterloo with trying to bring these signals and allow social robots to be able to interpret some of those signals in real time and to be able to change their behavior, like conversational agents, accessing our arousal levels and being able to modify the way that they interact with us by accessing with our permission some of those signals. So we have done some research in creating those tools that can similarly as we did with Unity, and in this case would be with ROS, which is the operative systems of a lot of robots, to be able to access those signals and access the interpretation of the scene. So with that, I would like to thank you everyone for being part of the panel. And now I think we're open to a couple of minutes of questions.
I'm just here to moderate questions, and I see already a couple of hands in the air here and also online. Let's go back to the chat because there was a question very early on, and I believe that was specifically directed towards Efi. It's from Hannah. they say, I'm sorry, I wonder if you deal with participant experienced motion sickness during the study. I think it will also affect the expression and heart rate a lot. If so, how do you handle that? Ify?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question, and especially it applies in experiences that have a lot of movement from one place into the other. And if you don't use the right locomotion mechanism, you might end up with people feeling seriously sick. What we've done in the past, we didn't have a lot of studies in which motion sickness was induced, because the majority of experiences were naturally moving. So we didn't have anyone feeling sick from those. The ones we actually had this symptom in was in seated experiences. So you sit and you put in the VR headset and then you're traveling through an experience, with either with a smooth movement or by teleporting from one place into the other. These are all different locomotion techniques. But yes, it induced motion sickness. And, the first and the best signal to let you know that the person is undergoing that state is a verbal assessment. They will tell you instantly. And if that happens, there's not much point looking at the data. The best that you can do is take the headset out and let them breathe, and bring a fan and some water, make sure that they're okay. If it does happen, there's a lot of research currently undertaken. There is a researcher at Tilburg University of the Netherlands, Phil Brown, who's actually working on translating motion sickness into physiological signals and how those are expressed in virtual reality. So we will soon know what his results are from his research. But yeah, I think that will be definitely, you will see a result. You will see some reduced expressivity. You will see some reduced engagement, and potentially heart rate will drop or increase. It depends on the person. But it's not something that I've studied, so I will leave it for the experts.
Thank you, Ify. And John, you have worked with older adults in VR as well. Have you experienced cyber sickness with those participants?
Yeah, we were also working and looking at the inertial measurement unit, the motion information from the head when we deployed virtual reality with older adults at home. And we always have 10 to 15% of our participants, they, right at the very beginning of the game or the experience, they express their motion sickness. So because it was a multi-session study, they didn't manage to continue. We noticed some others were actually feeling light motion sickness at the beginning, but they were able to cope with it. Just the same way that you were able to cope maybe with when you're on a boat and you were traveling, and because of destinies, so you really want to be in that place, so you can only cope with it. The same thing with the VR. So if you provide good content or a good reason why, kind of like dealing with that, people will continue and the brain will adapt. But there's always people that are more prone towards it, and we found that in older adults.
Thank you. So I see the question here, but just so that you know, we do actually have some researchers here at the Games Institute who study cyber sickness specifically. So I would encourage you to look at some of the work that's coming out from the a lab led by Michael Barton-Cohen here in kinesiology department. We also had Kayleen MacArthur doing some work with her colleagues in her group on cyber sickness. I will tell you, as a person who has severe motion sickness and cyber sickness, the destination is important, but only so far. I will pass on anything if I know that I will suffer. Having said this, some of the research from Michael Barton-Cohen's team actually suggests what you've seen, John, that narrative of a virtual reality experience and how engaging it is and how it's presented to the participants actually can lower or impact the severity of the cyber sickness that participants that they have at least had in their studies experience. So there's quite a bit of work, I think, from both biometric sort of standpoint, but also narrative standpoint that it is out there for the taking. So let's take a question in person. Go ahead.
My name is Monica. I'm from the Gambling Research Lab from the Department of Psychology. We're currently studying flow in VR to see whether that can reduce cybersickness. It's like a primary study. In terms of IFI's research on the museum experiment, how did you label the events? Were the events preset so that they were just like whatever those points are, the biometrics were taken, or was that depending on whatever the facial features were that set the particular point?
Yeah, if the question is around labeling the events specifically for the experience at the museum.
Yes. So if I've heard the question correctly, please let me know if I'm not answering on point, because I could only hear half of it from my audio. Sorry about that. I think basically what we did was record continuously in the experience and continuously add events, right? So the events were made either from points that you were looking at, points that you were interacting with. So you could have multiple instances of the same event, right? The duration of interaction, and also the type of it. Then for the facial reactivity, I think you asked if we took events and labels from those. We didn't actually use them in real time at the study. We created that dashboard that I showed you afterwards, but the dashboard is working in real time. So how it works is that it takes a short time segment of data and is working through a machine learning model, which is using an SVM, and that calculates the 3 or 4 different expressions, and it gives you an intensity from that as well. And the time window that we've chosen, of course, you can play with that a lot. If you want to have something real time, you might want to have 356 samples. You might want to go higher. You might want to go, depending on what is the most informative time window you want to do the analysis on. In most cases, with heart rate or with other signals, you want to have a much longer window, but you want to have it as a rolling window, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Iffy. And if you have a follow-up in the next round, okay?
Yes.
Richard, have been waiting patiently. Go ahead. Unmute, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So first off, thank you both for very interesting topics. I've been enjoying it very much. So what I've been doing is I've been creating some virtual reality tools to help for urban sound planning. So helping people plan how cities will sound. So for this part, it's been pretty successful so far, just doing, interviews, metrics, questionnaires, data. So it's really good. So next step, though, of course, I want to get more into some, finer tuned data, of course, so some biometrics. And I have, basically 2 questions on that for kind of both of you. So first off, so I'm actually at McGill right now. We have a really nice, audio lab. We do spatial audio. So of course, when you're talking about the immersive storytelling, yes, it's like no surprise. Yes, the spatial audio, it's absolutely fantastic. Makes people more, you can detect a lot more effect going on, and et cetera. And so I'm wondering, first off, did you have, so watching those, it's of course very passive. So have you heard many other stories or examples of people actively engaging with sound that you've done different metrics with? So I know sound is very understudied, just it's really hard to interact with a lot of times. So I'm wondering if you guys have, done much with that, or have seen many stories.
Either one of you.
Iffy.
Iffy. All right, Iffy first.
Okay. So we've done some studies with audio, and predominantly that was to record the emotional responses of the user based on the audio, right? And there is a lot of literature just on small clips, and there's libraries that have been developed that say basically, okay, this sort of sound could create this sort of emotional response, but they don't capture all the breadth of sounds and experiences that you might want to have in your interactive narration. So yes, I completely agree with you that there's a lot of room there for research. What we have done anyway in the past, which probably just scratches the surface, is to utilize some of those libraries and also create new ones. And because the majority of those studies were based on examples or other organizations who needed us basically to work with them and provide the consultancy, it was the responsibility of the client to develop the additional sounds that they required. A prime example though of collaborator and sound designer is again Pollen Acoustics, because I think they have been working on creating a new library with I think I might be wrong, but I think it was like 1,000 sounds or so and different qualities, and they really engage and really go in depth with their research. So I think they would be a good contact to speak with if you're interested in that. And I would also say that there are other properties that are underlying the quality of the sounds that also take place and affect our emotions. For example, level of volume, context of if it's a voice, that, you know, if it's a female voice, a male voice, etc. If it's a baby or an older person, all these things play a lot, an impact on our physiology.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I'll just send you a short email follow-up later just for a couple of links or references. That would be wonderful.
Course.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Please do. Thank you.
John, anything to add?
The only thing that I've seen currently is the development of those headsets that include EEG sensors, dry EEG sensors, and when, you know, similar to the one that you have right now, Richard, while you listen certain music, they are trying to infer your engagement or your mood throughout the day. So what they're building is a library, or how do you react with certain music once you can connect music and the headband. So they're literally trying to create an assistant or a personalized Spotify for you using the brain waves. But this is taking advantage of, you know, the headphones that already exist nowadays, and how you can you know, sneak some sensors on it, maybe not very uncomfortable to use that information. And because you're wearing it 2 or 3 hours per day, this is, you know, ideal from our perspective, which is a lot of data that we could use for tune our models, which normally doesn't happen. A lot of the research that we do is 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes interaction. And that's, you know, enough for a lot of people when it comes to wearing sensors and headsets.
Thanks, John. And that's a very good intro to the next question that we got in the chat from Christina. But before I read that out, I know that we're slightly past time. I apologize to everyone, but we did start a bit late. So I want to give opportunity to the audience to get the most out of our speakers today. So Christina says, big question I have is the availability and cost of equipment for smaller research studies in palliative and dementia care, for example, especially for equipment, as you said, John, that is unobtrusive, sensitive, and cost-effective. Main variables are detection of pain or changes, and changes in relaxation. Your thoughts will be welcomed. I'm going to give this one, John, to you first, and then Evie.
So what we have done in the past is we have noticed that anything you need to put kind of like under skin, like chest strap sensors, or put extra, you know, headphones or something when it comes to collecting or doing the physiological monitoring can be very challenging, especially in palliative care. We're working with older adults. They are not used to wear technology. That's the reality. So, but nowadays, I've seen there's been a switch, especially with development of wearable sensors, smartwatches, and others. And if you can really convince an older adult that, you know, they could be wearing these smartwatches, and that will help them to eventually prevent things like falls or others, I will definitely see how they will keep wearing them, or especially to account for physical activity. So they can get that as a reward of 10,000 steps per day. So if you could use some of those smart wearable devices to collect that information, that normally helps. I know Fitbit they normally have APIs, and you can access a lot of data points, and they have good software infrastructure to do that. In working with dementia care, especially quantifying things like relaxation, I will definitely try to go with electrodermal activity, which is good for measuring arousal levels and exploring certain activities and try to label some of those activities to see what is their reaction entirely through that process, which is probably one of the less intrusive sensors that you could use, especially for all the levels.
Thank you. Ify, anything to add?
Yes, I think, John, as you said, it's very, very important to find the right method and have something wearable for that specific target group, right? I think we are going into this time in the era, right, where it's becoming more and more low cost, and more of these sensors are more easy to integrate. Basically, they're smaller, they're easier to integrate, and therefore they're included in different devices and settings. And the form factor is very important, because I guess in that case, because we have other projects and grants we've been running with people with dementia or people with Parkinson's, we've done some work using our glasses instead of virtual reality headsets or other sensors, because it's just easier for them, and we want them to be comfortable, especially in some other conditions where they're slightly older, maybe they have mobility issues, maybe they can't walk easily, so that you don't want to make their life harder, I suppose. And you can combine low cost wearables, or you can look at open science and open framework, because some of those, if you have a group or a partner, someone who can do, or yourself, I don't know exactly what you do, but I mean that if you can do the analysis of the raw data yourself, then you reduce the cost really effectively. So if you can have access to the sensor, then you can do the analysis yourself. But if you want to get quick access to models and software that has been built by others, you can look at low cost applications, but you can also speak directly with the organizations, because often, like we do, we offer discount for healthcare related projects, and we make sure that we can support them. So for example, at the moment, I think we have a 75% discount on the OcoSense for research similar to this. So if I can help you get that discount, if that's of interest there for you, let me know afterwards. There's also a lot of research on pain from facial expressions as well, but the wearables maybe on a cane or on a smartwatch, just like John mentioned, might be a very good starting point.
Thank you very much, Ify. I see that there wasn't a question, but actually a suggestion from another participant to Christine's question about eye tracking that it could be helpful with. Yes. So we have one more question in the audience. Thank you, John. And then I think we will wrap it up for today. So go ahead, please. And if you could please project your voice so that the microphone can pick you up, okay?
Okay. Is that okay? Is this a good volume? Can you hear me?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great. I have a couple of questions. One might be related to the other, hopefully. So if you had to measure frustration, like the experience is becoming frustrating for the user, not being pleasant, what kind of measurements would you take? Say like stress enough, is it like a measurement that you measure for relaxation or something else, or what would be the suggestion there? And linked to that, which kind of sensors have you already synchronized with ROS, for example, for that, making that kind of measurements?
So question is about frustration. What do you do with frustration? I would say always with physiological signals, 90% is about context. So frustration when you're watching something on the screen could be very different to when somebody's doing exercise, and that will have different signature in terms of the physiological responses. So the question would be, what is your context?
Might be teleoperating a robot.
So robot teleoperation, that's the context. So in my case, what I've been doing with modeling responses, especially in gaming or VR applications, I try to use a combination of sensors that are good for fight and flight responses, so sympathetic nervous system, and rest and digest responses, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. So it doesn't sound like a good insight, but it actually is, because there are some sensors that are good in picking up or activations when we are just being emotionally triggered by something. So heart rate variability, there's a branching frequency, and you do frequency analysis that is good in picking that up, for instance, or electrodermal activity. So counting for skin conductance levels, it could really tell you what you are being aroused with some specific experience. And being aroused doesn't necessarily translate to frustration. But when you are able to synchronize some of the events of your teleoperation task, then you might be able to find out if that arousal is or not related to certain positive or negative experiences related to that teleoperation. For instance, similar to what Aoife was mentioning, you label your tasks depending on the level of difficulty that they could be. So you start adding different tasks with different levels of difficulty, and then you track back some of these metrics that I'm saying. So at the end, you can construct a psychophysiological model on how, you go to the extreme, go to something super frustrated, let's say robotic arm, teleoperating, trying to make a pancake. You see, that's super complex. And then you do something like just grasping some element. So you go easy and you go to the other extreme, and then you try to get things in between. And then you get all the signals possible on each of those individual conditions. And then at the end, you can trace back some of the responses, and then you can create a psychophysiological model. So you see, it's not that there's some signals that are already there that are good for frustration. Depending on the context, you will find some metrics better than others. I don't know if you can complement and help me.
No, I think that was perfect. I completely agree with you and your idea on how to model it. It's a very good idea. I would only add on this that it's mainly because I'm biased, but I would definitely go as well with facial expressivity. And I remember one of the studies. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name now, but there was a study I read when I was a PhD student, and it was about it was all on a screen, and there was a little maze, and the user had to move a pointer from the entrance of the maze to the other exit. And halfway through, the system broke down, and the pointer was going in other places than when the user wanted. And they were able to detect exactly the point that the change happened just by looking at the corrugator activity, because it's by instinct that we saw our confusion and our angry faces just by activating that muscle. And it's not completely under voluntary control in the same way that we control our smile. So yes, there are some configurations that you can also use for frustration, and intense frustration should be much easier to detect than other emotional states.
Thank you. And with that, I'll just say that make a pancake sometimes confuses humans, not just robots. So thank you so very much for everyone for being here, both our in-person audience and definitely those of you online, in particular the folks from different time zones around the planet that has joined us today. And if you could please online use the emojis, and here in person, let's give a big round of hands to Aoife and Thank you so much. And just to wrap up, the recording of this event will be posted online on our YouTube channel. And I saw a request for the slides being distributed, so I will discuss this with our speakers today to protect their IP, obviously. And I hope that this event is the beginning of a conversation for some of you and interactions with our speakers, and have a good afternoon and or evening or good night if you're like across the globe someplace. Thanks so much. Aoife, John, thank you. Bye everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing it.